Today we are going to be making some color theory scales. There are going to be a total of 6 of them. Each one of them will have 7 sections. So this first one we're going to be working with is actually going to be called an achromatic scale. Now, achromatic scale means that it has no color in it. So this is going to be a black and white scale. As we mix these colors and as you use the sets of colors that you picked up from me, I want to emphasize a couple of things. Number one, these collections of colors are like your tubes of paints, and you want to be very careful as you start to use them to not mix any other color into it. You're going to do all of your mixing on some kind of a palette. This palette could be just a piece of paper or a plate or some piece of cardboard that you've covered with something, but you want to make sure that you're mixing on something and not in the containers. So you'll notice that as I demonstrate the mixing, my paintbrush has always been cleaned. It's not leaving some other color on it. All right, so be very careful. Treat these colors as if they were your tube of paint. The white, the black, the red, the yellow, the blue. You want them to stay pure and clean. You don't want any other colors mixed into them. So to begin with, as we do our scale, one end of the scale is going to be white. The other end of the scale is going to be black. So the very first thing I'm going to do is paint those two ends. Now it's off the camera, but I am rinsing out my brush really well so that when I go back and I now use the black, I don't have any white left on my brush. And with acrylic paints, we want to try to have our whatever we're painting to actually look opaque, which means we can't see through it. So be very careful as you rinse your brush off to not have lots of water left in your brush. You don't want to dilute these paints. In fact, if they get really diluted, you're going to want to go back and paint over it so that you have this nice solid color. So it's a good idea to have a paper towel close to you, and after you've rinsed off that brush, you're going to go back and dry some of the water off. All right, now one of the reasons I started with the achromatic scale is to emphasize that a little bit of black goes a very, very long way. So as I start to mix up this first color, it's going to be a tiny amount of black mixed into the white, and you're going to see an immediate kind of change, and you're going to get a very light gray. Now, as we progress with painting these scales, you want to have this gradual change between the two extremes. So we have white on the one end, black on the other end. I want to see a gradual change. I don't want to work all the way to the black end and have it still be very light grays and suddenly be black. I want to see this all the way across. So you're going to see as we do some of this mixing here that I may go back and add a little bit more of a color to it, or I may have to go back and mix a little bit of a color, but I'm looking to see that there's actually some changes. All right, so again, tiny amounts of black that you add to this already light gray in order to see a change. And in this case, I didn't think it was enough. So we're going to add a little bit more black here. And this is going to be our process until we get to about in the middle. All right, and sometimes I like to work all the way across. Sometimes I like to work to my middle color, so work from white to the middle and then work from black to the middle. That'll sometimes help me get a little bit more even and consistent amount of changes here. So as we work through this process, what you're going to see happening is simply adding a little bit more black to the color that we've gotten, which is starting to turn gray. All right, this fourth box in the center, this should look like the color you would get if you had equal parts black and white. Okay, so as I said, I like to work from one end towards the middle. So in this case, I am adding a little bit of that gray that I've already mixed up, okay, because it does have white in it. And what I'm trying to get is a nice dark gray that's not completely black. Now you'll notice I'm having to keep going back and adding some of this gray to the black. That is because, again, black is a very strong color, a very dominant color. It will take a lot more of a lighter color to change black than it will if you work directly with adding a little bit of black to a lighter color. All right, so as this dries, this will dry a little bit lighter and you'll be able to see the change. But again, I'm working from the extremes to the middle. So I'm adding a little bit more of that gray color, trying to lighten up that black so that I have something that is looking like it is gradually changing here. And that is going to finish up that achromatic scale. So achromatic meaning no color. We are working simply with the black and the white. And if you remember when we talked about the black and the white before, these are colors that are going to neutralize our other colors on the color wheel, our very intense colors on the color wheel. All right, now I'm pretty much done with this black and gray that I have here on the palette, and I would not want to probably use those again unless I were going to paint some more black or gray. So now we're going to work with another monochromatic scale, all right? And in this case, I'm going to ask you to mix up a green to start with. So if you remember from our color theory notes, green is a combination of yellow and blue. And again, if you look at these, yellow is the lighter color, blue is going to be the darker color. So I'm going to mix just a little bit of my darker color into the yellow. Here's my paper towel here. Remember, I want to dry off. I want to keep my colors. I don't want to add a lot of water to them. And I'm going to work with just a little bit of blue at a time, adding a little bit of blue into that yellow once I have placed these colors into my palette. And that little bit of blue will gradually change the yellow into a green. But I do want to do just a little bit at a time. So I have a pretty good green going here. And you'll notice that I cleaned my brush in between. There's a really good chance that I'm going to be using that blue again in a minute. So I didn't want to mix it up with something else. And when I am painting this monochromatic scale here, I'm going to work with the tints, which would be the color or the hue mixed with white. And I'm going to work with the shades, which is going to be the color or hue mixed with black. So I have divided up that green into two sections so that I have one that I can mix with white and one that I can mix with black. What you want to really try to avoid, you do not want to end up having black, white, and your color mixed together. You don't want to have grays mixing this. So in this case, with the monochromatic, our solid hue, intense, pure color is going in the middle, the very, very middle. And we're going to work to the left with our tints and, work to the right with our tints and then work to the left with our shades here. All right, so I'm going to get that nice, solid, opaque green. And I do want everyone to work with green as they mix their monochromatic scale. And I'm going to have to rinse my brush again, dry it off, because I need, since I've already mixed up my black and white and I've got grays over there, I need a new section that has just pure black in it, which will require me to wash my brush again. I can't emphasize that enough. And then a little bit more white. Again, those containers of paints, you need to keep them absolutely clean. It is like taking paint out of the tube. You don't want to get other colors mixed inside of that. All right, so now that I have two sections of green, I've got a little bit of black and a little bit of white on my palette. I'm going to start by mixing the tints. I'm going to take a little bit of that white and mix it into my green so that, and just a little bit, I'm looking for a small amount of change here so that I get just a slightly lighter green, just a little bit of a tint of that green, and that is going to get painted right next to the green in the center. All right, and my process here is I'm going to continue to add a little bit more white. All right, and again, once I have that white on my palette, it's not going to matter if I get green paint into the white on my palette. All right, it only matters if I dip that dirty brush back into basically my tube of paints here. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit more white. I'm going to add it to that tinted green already to make it a little bit lighter. I'm looking for there to be a distinct change here. I want each one of these 7 versions of green to look different. And this will be my process to finish up both this square and the next one. So this last square, I'm going to take, again, even more white, mix it in with my already tinted green to get a very, very light tinted green on the very end. So I'm going to take the rest of my white, mix that up, and paint it in place. All right, and now we are ready to start working with the shades of green. So again, remember I said we don't want our shades or our tints to be any combination of black and white. So rinse your brush really, really well. And also remember that we said a small amount of black goes a very, very long way All right, it's very hard to remove the black. It requires you to mix a whole bunch more of another color. So add just a tiny amount of black at a time. It will make a gradual change, and it's much easier again to just keep adding a little bit to get the color that you want. So green with a little bit of black is going to create our first shade. And again, it is going to go directly to the left of the green in the middle. And the process here, very similar to working with the tints. I'm going to paint on my green with a little bit of black, and then I'm going to add a little bit more black to that green I've already mixed, and I'm going to keep adding a little bit of black until I get these nice dark shades of green going to the left, each one of them showing a gradual change and a little bit of difference, so that we have a nice scale here showing the tints and the shades of green. Now, another thing I'd like to point out, you see me kind of moving my brush around on the edge of the palette. What I'm trying to do is, since I'm using my brush to do a lot of the mixing, I'm trying to wipe off a lot of that paint so that most of the paint is just on the tip of the brush. That gives me a little bit more control over where the paint goes. So I'm kind of wiping off that excess paint into the palette before I scoop up some more paint, or before I paint there on my sketchbook here, so that I have most of the paint just on the tip of my brush. All right, and this is going to complete the monochromatic scale. Again, and this would work the same way for any color, but I wanted you to use green. All right, and you see this gradual change, and with monochromatic, the hue, the main color, is there in the center. All right, we are going to be moving on to some, we've got two other scales that we're going to do. Before we do that, if you see there, we've got some pretty dirty water. You do want to quite often change your water so that you're working with clean water. That is especially important if you work with some lighter colors. And for our complementary color scheme, we're going to do two complementary color schemes. One of these we're going to be working with yellow. You definitely want to make sure that when you're working with these lighter colors that you don't have dirty water. That dirty water will definitely change the color as you start to mix with it. So grab yourself some clean water here. We're going to draw the same 7 boxes for this scale. And this very first scale that we're going to do here, this is going to be the complements of orange and blue. All right, so we have a little bit of blue already in our palette, unless you've cleaned yours up like I did. I needed a little bit more room here to work. So I'm going to be adding some blue, and I'm going to have to mix my orange. So the orange is going to be a combination of yellow and red. And again, just like when I mixed up the green, when I start to mix the yellow and the red, I'm going to mix just a little bit of red into the yellow being the lighter color, the red being the darker color. You want to add just a little bit of the darker color into a lighter color to get those changes, because the darker color will make the lighter color change much faster. All right, and again, I'm emphasizing these colors that you have in your containers. These are like the tubes of paint. You want to make sure that you always have a clean brush that you're using to scoop out of. Okay, you can use that same brush, just make sure that you are cleaning it every time and drying it off before you stick that brush back into those containers of paint here. All right. So with a clean brush, a little bit of red mixed into that yellow, and I'm immediately saying a good change. That yellow is quickly becoming an orange color. I'm wiping all of that excess paint off the edges of the brush so that it's just on the tip. And because we are working from our two complementary colors, one of those complements is going to be on the far right. So I'm putting my orange on the right, and then I will be putting my blue on the far left, and we will work towards the center. Clean my brush off really good, dry it off on my napkin, and we're going to paint the other end of our complementary scale here. And we're going to be doing two complementary scales. On this first scale, I'm going to demonstrate mixing the colors very much like I did when we painted the achromatic, meaning that I'm going to work towards the center. All right, so I'm going to start with my orange, and I'm going to mix just a little bit of blue. All right, now, like I did with the green, I want two sections of my orange. One that I'm going to mix with the blue into the orange, and the other one may be the orange into the blue. But we're going to work from one side. We're going to work from the orange, adding a little bit of blue towards the center first. All right, so tiny amount of blue being the darker color again. It's going to make a change. It's going to start to neutralize that orange. It's going to start to look kind of like a brown longhorn orange, if you're a longhorn fan. Right, and so we've got this slightly neutral color here now painted right next to the orange. And I'm going to continue to add just a little bit of blue to this orange, and it's going to start to getting even more of a brown color until I get to the center. All right, once I get to the center, I'm going to work from the other side. I'm going to start from the blue and work towards the center. So here I've got a little bit of a brown. I'm going to start adding a little bit more blue to that color. And since I know that the blue that I have on my palette is going to eventually have a bunch of this orange mixed into it, I don't have to necessarily wash my brush. Okay, now this is where you make just a judgment call here. My thinking was that I had put too much blue in there. Remember, this changes it quite a bit. The brown that I got, I felt like was more of the color that I would want in the middle. So I've needed to use some of that orange that I already mixed up, which may mean that I have to make some more orange in order to finish this scale here. So again, as I'm painting this, I'm, as the artist, am making a judgment call as to whether or not my color has changed too much. All right, you want to be aware that what we should have in this complementary color scheme between the blue and the orange, blue and orange make some of the best browns, what you think of as a brown. So the color that's directly in the middle should look like a brown. Here. And that color looks a little bit too similar to the one I just painted. Now you'll notice that because I didn't mix up a whole lot of paint, I don't have a lot left right now. So keep in mind that as you do that, the less paint you have, the bigger the change you're going to have as you add other colors to it. So it took only a tiny amount of blue to make this pretty big change. So that's a good color right there in the center. And now I'm going to need to work with the blue and add little bits of orange to the blue. Okay, so my goal here was to work with the colors that I already had and mix up what looks like mostly blue with a little bit of orange. And you can see that I had used up all the rest of the orange that I had. So I'm going to have to mix up a little bit more orange to finish up this scale. Now this is a good time to talk about a question I get a lot, which is how do you make black? And there's just really a theory on the black, and you can kind of tell with that next to the last color there, with the next to the blue and the color I'm painting right now, how very, very dark it looks, and it actually looks kind of like a really messy green. But in theory, black is a combination of all the primary colors, the red, the yellow, and the blue. Since orange is made up of red and yellow, and then we've mixed with blue here, you can kind of see how that theory works. Now, obviously, it's not that true jet black that we think of coming right out of the tube. All right, our second complementary color scheme, we are going to again draw this rectangular box with 7 sections in it, and this time we are going to work with yellow and violet. And in this example, instead of working from the extremes to the middle, I am just going to start with the yellow, and after I've mixed up my violet, I'm going to just keep adding violet to the yellow and keep adding. If you're really careful, it really doesn't matter which technique you use, as long as you don't end up with this big jump when you get to the end. So when I work from the yellow towards the violet end, I don't want to have this big jump between the 6th color that I have mixed and the violet. I want it to have a gradual change, that all those neutrals in the center should look like they've gradually shifted between the yellow end and the violet end. All right, so we're going to mix up our violet color here with the reds and the blues. They are pretty close in their dark. I mean, if you're thinking of yellow, yellow's obviously very light. Red and blue are pretty similar here. So what you're looking for is a true violet. Be careful about it still being too red. And what I gave you in your sets was a cool red and a cool blue, and those are the mixing colors. They're going to make the best greens and the best violets. All right, so I've got me a pretty good violet color here, and the violet is really, really dark. So just like what we talked about with the black, a small amount of violet is going to make drastic changes to the yellow. So in just a moment after I painted my violet on the far right over here, I'm going to need to make sure that I wash my brush really, really well so that I have a nice clean brush and I'm just putting a small amount of violet in with the yellow. And then I'm going to work all the way from the left with the yellow to the right instead of mixing towards the middle this time. So I'm going to wipe off as much of that violet color as I can from my brush before I rinse it all out. And again, you want to try to keep from diluting your paints. If your water is really, really gross and messy right now, definitely make sure you dry your brush in between. That'll help to keep from making that yellow already really muddy just with dirty water. And I'm taking a small amount of violet, very small amount, and mixing it into a section of yellow here. And again, when you mix your complementary colors together, you are neutralizing those colors. So that yellow that was really nice and intense, this is a little bit more of a dull yellow. All right, now if you don't get enough of a change here, Right? If it looks too close, then take a little bit more of that violet and mix it in there. So that gives me a little bit more of a change. Mix it in really good and then paint that next section. All right, now for this process, every time I paint a new square here, I'm going to take a little bit more violet and mix it into that color I just finished mixing. I just want to make sure that I'm taking just a small amount. All right, I want to create a change, and if I go too far, then I've got to go get some more yellow. It'll be much easier for me to just add a little bit more of the violet color than it would be to have to wash my brush and go add more yellow to this. All right, so this is my process all the way till I get over to the violet. All right, and here you're seeing this is again a neutral color. This is going to make some really good, not your bright shiny golds, but what a lot of times is called a gold kind of color is the yellow, and mix a little bit of the complement there. Right, and again, just a tiny amount of the violet being so much darker than the yellow. And if you compare this middle color that has been mixed with the middle color above in the yellow, in the orange and the blue complementary scale, they're not exactly alike, but they are very close. All right, so your complementary colors are how you get your browns essentially. All right, and that's going to finish up our two complementary color schemes. And I want you to make sure that you are using the same colors that I'm demonstrating here. By the time we have finished painting our 6 scales, you will have worked with and mixed almost every color on the 12 color wheel. All right, so this is a good time again to stop and rinse your brush out really good. Go change your water. Make sure you have plenty of space on your palette. And we're going to get started now with an analogous color scheme. Now the cool thing about your analogous color schemes is you are working with the pure colors on the color wheel. So this color scheme is going to stay nice and bright and be more of a, almost kind of like a gradual change of the colors and all the kind of in-between ones that you would see on the color wheel. So again, we are going to start with 7 sections, and on the first analogous color scheme we're going to work with just 3 colors. So we are going to work with blue green, green, and yellow green. So we're going to have more of those in-between colors, that variety of colors that you get that aren't necessarily named on the color wheel, depending upon how much of that of yellow or blue you have in them. All right, so I've cleaned off my palette a little bit. I need another section that I have with yellow. I'm probably going to need a fair amount of yellow here, because yellow and blue will be the only 2 primary colors I'm using here. And again, as you're working out of your container, make sure that you have a very clean brush, that you've wiped off any excess water, as you do not want to get any other colors mixed into your containers of paint. Do all of your mixing on a plate or a piece of paper or something like that, not in your containers, your tubes of paint here. So we're going to be working with yellow, and we're going to be working with blue. And I'm going to kind of divide my blue and put it in 2 different parts of my palette here. All right, now there's several ways that you can approach this. All right, in this case I am starting with the green in the middle, and I will work with that green, and then I'll mix some yellow into it to gradually move to the yellow green end, and then I will mix some blue into the green and work to the blue green end of this. You certainly could start with a yellow, and if you think about it, yellow green is simply mostly yellow with a small amount of blue. So if you started with mostly yellow and a small amount of blue, if you were careful with your mixing, you could just keep adding a little bit more blue until you got the green in the center, and then continuing to add a little bit more blue as you move to the blue green on the other end. All right, in this case I'm going to start with the green in the center, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow into it and continue to mix more yellow into it until I get a nice bright yellow green at the far right. And it looks like I'm going to need to add a little bit more yellow to my palette here. And if you just want to mix what's on your brush in with that yellow, you'll definitely get a nice, really bright yellow-green there. All right, we're going to clean our brush, and then we are going to work on the other side. A little bit of blue into that green that I had divided up. It goes right next to the green in the center. Add a little bit more blue to that color I've mixed. Make it even a bluer green. And lots of blue here to get our last really blue-green here. All right, so that analogous scale is done. We're going to do one more, and we're going to work with some warm colors here, but we are going to have this scale use 4 colors from the color wheel. So draw out another section, a nice long rectangle that's going to have 7 spots in it. And we are going to work from orange to red violet. So there'll only be one in-between color between these. So we'll go from orange to red violet. So these are going to be some warm colors here. And because that red violet is going to have a little bit of blue in it and my oranges are all just the reds and the yellows, I'm going to have a small amount of blue on my palette, but mostly yellow and red that I'm going to work with. So again, as I get these colors out of my containers, I'm going to make sure that I have a very nice clean brush in between as I change colors and add them to my palette here. And it will only take a little bit of blue to make a red violet here. Now, if you remember from when we made our orange before, it does not take a whole lot of the darker color to get a good change here into the yellow. So I had a lot more yellow in there. It didn't take nearly as much red to change that into a nice orange that we're going to work with. Now, if I'm careful from where I scoop, I can just keep adding a little bit of red to this orange to get the in-between colors. But remember, there's one of these squares here that is pure red. So if I end up using up all this red, or I end up mixing up too many colors into that red that I'm working from, I may have to get some more pure red, of course with a clean brush, to paint my red only section. So that was a good red orange. So now we're adding even more red here to get between the red orange and the red. I want some kind of in-between color. And I will definitely need to wash my brush, wipe off as much of that color as I can, then wash my brush out. Unless I feel like that change wasn't enough, we'll mix the rest of that red in there to get a little bit more of a change in between the red, orange, and the red. All right, now I'm washing my brush out, and I'm going to need just a little bit more of the red. So again, I'm working from my container of red. I want to make sure that I have a nice clean brush before I get any of that red out. Okay, and just a small amount of blue to make that change here. As we want a nice red violet. And that looks a little darker on my palette because of the light, but since we're right next to red, we definitely want this to be very red here. Okay, and then we'll take some more of that blue, mix it in there, get a nice strong red violet. And if you look on there, you can kind of tell that I've decided that that color that I painted there was too big of a change. All right, so I'm going to remix that color just a little bit so that it has more red in it. All right, and we finish up with just the regular red violet. Now hopefully when this dries a little bit, you'll see the greater changes in between them. Right now, between my oranges and my red oranges, there we go, with the palette out of the way, that's a little bit better. You can see the changes. I probably could have had not quite so much blue on those two on the end. You can see how I've got a pretty big jump there. So that is one thing you want to try to avoid. So here are our 6 scales from our achromatic black and white to our green monochromatic. We've got our complementary. So I want you to label these. So go ahead with the complementary and put the blue and the orange underneath them, and the yellow and the violet. And we've already got the letter initials for our analogous colors. So with our analogous is where you got a lot of the mixing of the colors on the color wheel. So we've definitely mixed oranges, we've mixed a violet, we've mixed a green, you've got yellow green, blue green, you've got the red orange. The only colors we really did not mix on the color wheel were the blue violet and the yellow orange. But you should have a really good idea of how to do that.